We've just been moved on. Clearly the authorities don't like us talking about controversial subjects. We were on to Basel III, I believe, and accounts payable.
Yes, it appears that the true bankers in the world, the ones who actually have the assets, are certainly discouraged about the direction of the banks who are actually only debt servicers. And so there are adjustments being made to certainly bring the accounting proper. And that is, they're requiring that all of the off-balance sheet ledgering be brought back onto the proper ledger to demonstrate the necessary zero. As you understand, since we're operating in the mirror, all of our transactions and so forth are under an accounting system known as double entry bookkeeping, which requires at the close of business each day that the bank demonstrate zero balance.
Is that where the books are balanced?
Correct.
We talk about in common parlance.
Yes, yes. See, since we're operating under admiralty jurisdiction and bankruptcy, our procedures are in equity, which means that the accounting must demonstrate that fairness has been done to all parties, and the only way that a fairness can be demonstrated is if the account payable and the account receivable side demonstrate a zero balance. It goes back into physics for those who might be interested in looking at zero field theory. I mean, certainly physicists understand that. I was talking to a physicist one day, eminent physicist, and I was talking to him about all these accounting things in commerce, and he was scratching his head. He says, "What's that all about?" I said, "Well," I said, "you understand zero field theory?" He said, "Well, yes." He says, "I understand that." I said, "It's the exact same thing. All things must go back to zero." And you can see it in nature everywhere you go. For instance, the River Thames over here, it flows out to the sea because in nature, everything has to come back into harmony. And whereas there is an imbalance, it will seek its own level. And so it's the same way in accounting. We have to have these things, or otherwise there is an inequity and there is no fairness.
Recently there has been a big wave of foreclosures in America again, this time with homeowners. Are there many people that are now using this technology you're talking about to protect themselves?
Yes, it's starting to, that's the reason why we're doing our solutions in commerce, is so that people will be educated as to the true nature of the transactions and so forth they're doing. Most people generally don't even conceptualize of the principles of commerce, and so we have been trying to educate and bring these things to their attention so they can act correctly in commerce rather than just act in ignorance. And so yes, it is starting to catch on. There's a great movement, I would say, in the United States. There are many teachers, not just myself, certainly, but there are many teachers who are going across, doing seminars, giving out information. The internet is a great source.
Yes.
And so I think people are becoming more enlightened about the nature of commerce and these matters here. And so at that point, they can start to work for themselves and correct their commerce.
Right, I mean, in this country we equally have a big problem with foreclosures and banks calling in debts and things like that. Do you think that the principles that are being used in the United States can be used here as well?
Oh, absolutely. It's the same system. And like I say, since the 1980s, we have been struggling on the grassroots level, trying to correct these problems and find the remedies and so forth. But now, thank God, Basel III has come in and is forcing the debt servicers / banks to bring the ledger back on for our inspection. And so we have great and high hopes of the results of the Basel III agreements. In the United States, it appears at this point that all of the smaller banks and most of the larger banks are compliant. The one which is not compliant is the private bank known as the Federal Reserve Bank,
right,
which appears to be absorbed into the Treasury. And so hopefully in the United States and here in the United Kingdom and other places in the world we'll have proper banking.
Right, now in the United Kingdom, when people buy a house, this is quite an interesting subject. Do they actually buy a house and own it, or what is the proper commercial description of what they're actually doing?
Okay, let me describe that. In order to buy and sell, now listen to the words, buy and sell. In order to do that, you have to have a substance with which to do an exchange. And since we have gone into bankruptcy and are using a fiat currency, it is impossible to buy and sell. What is happening is actually we are transferring liability on a title. See? And so when you go and the word that we use under this system is purchase.
Right. Now you've just used a lot of terminology that the man on the street might not actually be familiar with because it's not spoken about in broad circles. What does what you're describing mean for the ordinary man on the street?
Well, again, my original understanding and education was in theology rather than commerce, and so it all goes back to the technologies of redemption of sin. See, in theology we use the word sin, and in commerce we use the word debt.
Are they in some way interchangeable?
They're the same word.
They are the same word.
If you look in King James Version of the Bible, the Lord's Prayer, wherein he says, "Forgive us this day our debts as we forgive our debtors." Now those are commercial terms, those are not theological terms. And so you see the importance of King James Version to describe the correct way to carry on commerce, perhaps. And anyway, the study that I had done in theology certainly assisted me to understand these commercial principles in greater depth. And so the man on the street, I usually say, someone will ask me, how do I study commercial redemption? And I always say, go read King James Version, because that will adequately demonstrate the principles of commerce so that a person could more successfully operate in commerce.
Which parts of that particular version are of most importance for people to look at?
Probably the New Testament. And sometime perhaps we can have a discussion on some of the technology and so forth on there. The parables and so forth that are given will give examples of how a person would properly conduct themselves. The technology and so forth, perhaps maybe the book of Hebrews.
So are you suggesting that the Bible is in some way a commercial code that one can use?
King James Version is a commercial code, not the others.
Right. Where are the main differences between King James Version and other versions of the Bible that make King James Version particularly useful for commerce?
Well, it goes back to the purpose and the intent of the translators of King James Version, and that was the man who oversaw, or who was the overseer of the translation of King James Version, was a man named Robert Flood. Excuse me.
Robert Flood. Okay.
Robert Flood. And without getting into the mystery societies and so forth, simply to state that Robert Flood at that time was also the Grand Master of Priory of Zion. I'm not going to get off on all that, but just to emphasize that the priory was closely related to Knights Templars, and then you can trace that history down through the ages to our present time.